Hello. Yes, that's right. I am here again with another topical, educational sort of video. This is a video that I have been wanting to make for a long time, but I've put it off because I felt like it needed a kind of the treatment that some of my historical Jesus and Q gospel videos got, where I wrote a whole script and recorded all the audio and edited it all nicely and made slides for it. And trying to make videos that way is one of the reasons why I go months and months without making videos, because it's just so much work. And this style of just kind of talking is better for me. So I think I can do this topic enough justice. And today, what I want to talk about is biological sex and the idea of something being a social construct or a social construction. Um, Now it's kind of like a canard in like online discourse that anytime trans people come up, or intersex people, or just the concept of gender, you hear a lot from different types of people, some well-meaning and others not so well-meaning, that, oh well, gender is a social construct, but sex is a biological construct, whatever that means. And you hear this from people who, some of whom think they are like being trans affirming and are trying to be supportive in a strange way of trans people by saying that, affirming that they have the right to choose their gender or to not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth, but that, kind of separate from that, they do have a biologically determined sex. And then other people will also make this argument, but they won't really be meaning to affirm people's right to identify as a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth. It's kind of, you see this with J.K. Rowling and her trans activists are denying biology nonsense. Where they might pay lip service to the idea that gender is a social construct, but they kind of get around this and still be outwardly openly transphobic by just appealing to sex and kind of negating the importance of gender at all. You see this in a lot of TERFs and Rowling. As I don't know if J.K. Rowling is technically a TERF, but you see it in people like that, where they will grudgingly kind of admit that gender is a social construct, but they'll call trans women male-bodied people or shit like that. So I want to address today why that's wrong, and a couple of disclaimers first. I should have done this one at the beginning, but I hope that people can tell from the title of the video that this is going to just discuss gender and sex, and so naturally kind of the specter of transphobia is going to be hanging over this whole thing. So that's just a little content warning that I should have said at the beginning, but I screwed up. Sorry. The other thing is that I am a cis dude, so I am by no means an expert in what it means for an individual to transition or to come out as trans or to experience dysphoria or to live as a trans person or experience transphobia firsthand. I just am a person that understands what we mean when we say something as a social construct. And I think that's something that's lacking from a lot of these discussions. People just kind of appeal, oh, something is a social construct, without really having an understanding of what that means. And I think I can do an okay job of explaining that. At least I hope. We're going to find out. So, yeah. So, okay, and the final little disclaimer is that this video and my description is not going to convince any transphobes to stop being transphobic. And I don't intend it to be. It would be nice if we could do that if I knew how to do that, but I'm just not. Most of them are determined to be transphobic, and you can't change their hearts with facts and logic. This video is for the first type of people who say this, the ones who I think are mostly well-meaning when they say that gender is a social construct, but sex is biological, or variations thereof. Um, the problem with this line of thinking, aside from the fact that it's wrong, is that it leads to this idea that trans people are only valid if they like medically transition, if they go through sex reassignment surgery or gender confirmation surgery to change their biological sex. And there's like a lot of things that are wrong with this. Transition surgery is and hormone therapy and all of that is not available to everybody, especially in a country like the United States, where the healthcare system basically runs on the principle of like die if you're poor. How dare you come to a hospital? So people don't have the luxury of transitioning medically, even if they want to or would. And other people don't want to for various reasons. I mean, possibly because of the rampant and virulent transphobia that exists in the world. They don't feel safe doing that. Possibly because they just don't want to. It's a medically invasive process, and they don't want to deal with that, and that's totally fine. They have a right to make their own choices about their body, and it doesn't. None of those types of people, for whatever their reason is for not transitioning, it's not right to just say, oh well, they can identify as whatever gender they want, but their sex is still the one they were assigned at birth. That is still transphobic. So we're going to get into why. So even though I know that like out transphobes aren't going to care about this video, they're already in the comments typing some nonsense. But for those of you that have bought the gender is social, sex is biological, false distinction that gets made a lot, and want to and you're sympathetic to trans people and you want to affirm trans people, but you found yourself saying that line and believing that, that's who this video is for. So the main thing that this comes down to is language. Gender and sex are both words. They are not immutable physical realities in the world in the way that you're thinking, that you might be thinking now if you're not familiar with this line of reasoning. So we can use gender as an example because that one is kind of more well understood as a social construct. Gender usually refers to how you present in the world and your like social position within culture and society. And it's easy to see how that's a social construction, something like women wear dresses and men wear pants, right? There's nothing inherently about a pair of pants that only works for men. It's just the way that society developed for various reasons. So when we say that gender is a social construct, it's pretty easy to see why, because like there's no reason a man can't wear a dress. I understand that it's strange for some people to see because it's still not something we see every day, and it's been so socially ingrained in us that men don't wear dresses, but it's just cloth, and there's nothing inherent to the shape of it that has anything to do with your genitals or your sexuality or your chromosomes or anything like that. But when it comes to sex, people have a harder time grasping that concept because gender and sex are tied together in the way that your so-called biological sex generally corresponds with the gender you're assigned at birth if you're cisgender. Stick with me here. So if you're born with the chromosomal pair of XY, which is what we consider male chromosomes generally, then you will generally end up identifying as a boy or a man and growing up socialized as a boy or a man and thinking of that as your gender. That's what we call being cisgender. If you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. Now, the problem with that, or XX for girls and women. Now, see, the problem with that is it doesn't actually apply to all people, the chromosomal link. Or even if you did it just by genitals. If you say, if you have a penis, you're a boy, a vagina, you're a girl. That doesn't apply to all people, and neither does the chromosomal pairing. And I see this kind of gets thrown around by people who are making this argument. The argument that I'm making, they'll try to say that gender is a social construct and that sex is a social construct, and they'll throw out the line, intersex people exist, therefore sex is a social construct. And this is correct, and all I'm doing here is just kind of explaining why that is, because I've seen people shut it down by saying that's not an argument, you're just saying something without proving it. So here's the actual explanation and argument, because I think even people who use this don't really totally understand kind of the nitty-gritty of why sex is still a social construct. And that, by the way, we'll get into this a little more at the end, but even if there were no intersex people and every single human being fell into the categories of the same chromosomal and genital pairs, and there were only two, sex would still be a social construct. Okay, but we are going to, we'll leave that aside till the end. So, all language is socially constructed. Languages developed many, many thousands of years after our species developed, and after hominids in general developed. And all language is an abstract group of sounds that our mouths can make that represent concepts or objects or ideas, things like that. So when I say sex is a social construct, what I mean is that the word sex is a word that is used to describe a set of biological characteristics, generally hormones, chromosomes, and genitals, right? When people say sex is biological and not, and in a way that it means, that implies that it's not socially constructed, what they're missing is that biology doesn't tell us what sex is or can be or isn't. It doesn't tell us anything about sex. Biology tells us about characteristics, about chromosomes, about genitals, about hormones. Biology does matter, and it tells us about all those things. What it doesn't do, or shouldn't do, is assign any kind of value to those things. So we can look and say, imagine we didn't have any word for biological sex. What we would have to say is, okay, so instead of saying there's males and females, we'd say there are people with XX and XY chromosomes and penises and vaginas and more testosterone or more estrogen, etc., etc. What language does, and this is the social construction part, is it takes those characteristics and folds them into the label of biological sex, because we use biological characteristics to kind of form those categories, but those categories are not in and of themselves biologically immutable. They're not matter in the universe. You can't go look on the periodic table and see a sex element somewhere on there. So the way we describe these things is what's socially constructed, and what that means, this is why a lot of leftists like to talk about linguistic prescriptivism versus linguistic descriptivism, which is the opposite. And it's the idea that language is defined by people who use it, and this is not a controversial thing among most linguists and linguistic anthropologists. Languages don't fall from the sky. You don't, go dig in the earth and find languages. They're just made up by people over the course of thousands of years. And if people just all start using a word a certain way, that's what that word means. The dictionary describes how words are used. It doesn't decide what words mean. So when we look back around to sex, what I'm saying is, you can try to define sex any way you want. You can say, okay, if you have XX, you're a woman. If you have XY, you're a man. There's going to be people who that doesn't apply to, right? There are so many different kinds of intersex people and intersex conditions that just completely throw off that idea. And and then no matter how granular you get with it, you could say, okay, if you have XX and a vagina, then you're a woman. And if you have XY and a penis, you're a man. Again, there's just going to be any combination you do, there's going to be human beings that doesn't apply to. That's why intersex people get kind of thrown into this discussion, because they just definitively prove, like from a purely biological standpoint, that categorizing sex into this binary choice of male or female, it just doesn't work. And I'm sorry to intersex people that you have to be used as this like political football, just brought into discussions of sex and gender this way. I really would like to hear from intersex people about this, and I will try to link some videos or maybe some articles in the description to places where you can actually go and hear from intersex people, because first of all, a lot of intersex conditions are invisible and people tend to not know about them until, maybe until they die or they go their whole lives without knowing about it. So there are a lot more intersex people than we realize, and I see them get brought into this discussion a lot, but I rarely see, when that happens, I rarely see them given the platform to speak for themselves. So, anyways, so at the end of the day, what we're saying is, biological sex is just another categorization system like gender. It's less to do with like how society sees you. Like a man in a dress who lives as a woman. Let's take as an example someone who is born with a penis and with an XY chromosome, and he grows up and he considers himself a man, and then he decides to live as a woman, and he wears feminine clothes and changes his name to a feminine name. Society might treat him or her, I haven't even said what gender this hypothetical person would be, but so gender could describe society treating that person as a woman, while according to the sex is biological, his sex would still be a man. What I'm trying to say is that there's no reason why the term sex has to refer to that and has to be seen as this immutable facet of who a person is, other than that's the way that it has been and is used. The act of categorizing people based on their biological characteristics into a sex, that's what's a social construct. Having XY chromosomes is not a social construct, but saying that people with XY chromosomes are this, as if you can know something inherently about a person based on that fact, that's what is the social construct. It's not that biological sex doesn't mean anything. It does. And just like gender means something. And it's not that it's not important. Biology is very important. Just like gender is important to a lot of people. The point is that because these things are just words, those words can be changed over time. There's nothing inherently wrong with a hypothetical future where we don't categorize people based into male or female, but we just categorize them based on those biological traits. And that's what doctors need. People say like, oh, your biological sex is important for medical reasons. Your doctor needs to know. Your doctor doesn't need to know the fact that you are male. The doctor needs to know if you have a prostate, for example, or if they're looking for chromosomal disorders or genetic disorders. They just need to know what your chromosomal makeup is. They don't need to know male. They need to know the biological characteristics. And there's no reason that those biological characteristics have to be classified or categorized in such an immutable binary way. And again, that even goes for a hypothetical, non-real universe where intersex people don't exist, which they do. But I'm saying, even if they didn't, there's still no reason why we would need to group people into like hard, quote unquote, biological categories based on a set of characteristics. It just isn't necessary. Trans people could still exist in that hypothetical world without intersex people, because we can say, okay, you were born with XY chromosomes and a penis, but that doesn't make you a man. That just makes you a person with XY chromosomes and a penis. That's what it means to say that sex is a social construction. Of course, it is rooted in biology because it's based in a set of biological characteristics, but it is at its heart, it's an issue of language. Language changes over time. Language changes when people decide to start speaking differently and using different words and giving the words that we already have different meanings. So gender is a social construct. Sex is a social construct. Trans people deserve the right to live as whatever sex and gender they want to, and trans rights are human rights.